Hi guys, welcome back to the garage. I was going through some old photos and came across these, which I had taken in a small French village at a local classic bike show. There are quite a few rare bikes here, particularly for someone from the UK, but some of them are indeed rare full stop. So I thought I'd share them with you and just see if you like them. This is part one, which is basically the 4 strokes, and there'll be another video following on about 2 strokes and smaller capacity bikes in general. So let's have a look. First up, Zotero 125. I think it might be an ETM 4S, despite the rear brake looking like it's full width when it should be half width. But anyway, I don't know enough about them to be sure. This little bike was pretty advanced for its time, with hydraulic forks and rear shock absorbers, so really quite plush for a small commuter bike. Although having said that, the 125 market in France was very strong, immediately post-war in particular, as there wasn't any requirement to have a licence. You could just get on them and ride them around, no paperwork involved, so they were very popular. The engine's a 4-stroke, it's got overhead valves. It's bolted to a 4-speed gearbox as well, although there was a similar model with a 3-speed, which was obviously cheaper. The engine is pretty compact, quite good looking. Ignition was by coil, and the power was supplied by dynamo. The advertising for this bike at the time also boasts that it had an electric horn, which is very modern, very fancy. These were good, solid, reliable bikes and were used by the French police as their local runarounds. So, obviously, a well-respected little motor. Now, next to it is another bike from the same factory, this time a 350 HCTL, or at least I think that's what it is, from 1950, which is a Tourism Deluxe. It's fitted with a small side valve engine. It has a chain-driven magneto for the spark and a forward-mounted dynamo for the lights, which explains that elongated look that the engine has. It's also adorned with lots of bits of now yellowing Bakelite. Presumably they weren't quite so yellow when it was new. An early sign, I think, of the coming dominance of plastic that we were to become used to in later years. Next up is a Montegoyo, which frankly I'm struggling to identify. I don't know. It's definitely 1930s. It's a single port overhead valve engine. It looks to be a 500cc, which would be the right size. It's got exposed hairsprings in the head for the valves. The rear end's rigid, and it's got girders up front, which puts it 30 to 35-ish, I would have thought. Now, the problem I have identifying it is lots of the bikes from Monet were twin port, and this is only a single port. As for the other parts of the bike, the manufacturer had a huge range of options, so you could order larger headlights, hand change, foot change, have a battery, no battery, lots and lots of options available on these bikes. So if anyone knows the exact model of this, please stick it in the comments. I'd be intrigued to find out exactly what it is. Rattier is probably a less well-known name, certainly to me. They made motorcycles pre- and post-war in Bourg-en-Bresse, and all the motors were bought in, as far as I'm aware. They were just they built the frames and the bodywork, etc. This bike probably dates from the early 50s. It's a pretty stylish little thing. It's got appears to be well specified for that era. Lots of chrome splashed about. The motor is an AMC, which is not to be confused with the well-known British manufacturer of that name. This one stands for, and excuse my appalling pronunciation, this one stands for Atelier Mécanique du Centre, and they were based in Clermont-Ferrand, and at their peak, which was a mighty peak I might say, they supplied over 40 different small manufacturers with engine units. This is another AMC motor, earlier than the last one. It's still overhead valve though, 1951, Gillier. Now these are Very, very rare, really. They were made over on the Atlantic coast, produced in very small numbers, possibly because the styling and the girder forks might have been starting to look a little dated by the time these were coming out, compared to some of the high quality products from their domestic competitors. I don't know. Either way, not a bike you see very often. Next up is a Zotero side valve, probably mid-30s again, as it has the older style flatter headlamp rather than the elongated one that came later. It's fitted with a 225cc engine, which would apparently push it along up to 50 miles an hour, so not too bad. It could be ordered with or without lighting. Zotero was probably France's largest manufacturer pre-war, so these bikes were popular and well regarded. The bicycle tyre type pump is mounted on the front of the girder forks, which appears to be common at the time, as some of the other bikes we'll see later on also have it. This one's a Magnat des Bons, which is part of the Zotero empire, and it's a 125 Tenace, dating back to 1956. Now the Tenace was a slightly detuned economy version of a small range, which also comprised a Fleuron and Tenor. It had less enclosing bodywork, which is probably a good thing in my opinion. The engine was a 125 overhead valve 4-stroke, and apparently is mounted in the frame, at least as I understand it, on silent blocks to help reduce vibration. This one, the Tenace, would normally come from the factory, I think, with a single seat rather than the dual type that's got on here. But I mean, that could have been changed at any time from one of the others in the range. Another name that you might not have heard of is jima, which stands for Groupement Industriel Métallurgique et Automobile, which existed in Puy-de-Dôme for a short time, only for about 9 years, from the late 40s onwards. This is another AMC engine. This time it's a 250. It's solid looking, as is the bike with its heavily balanced guards. So it's clearly not aimed at a sportier type market, but solid, looks good. The engine again is very compact, and it's an overhead cam unit with the cam running the points, which are housed in their own housing in an extension on the side of the head. I think this engine unit has a bit of a look of the 1950s Moto Guzzi singles about it, the way it leans forward and things. Anyway, stylish, I like it. I'd certainly own one, that's for sure. Next up are 3 Moto Comfort of decreasing age, so we're getting younger as we go through them. First up is what I think is a D45S, which is post-war, fitted with a 125 side valve engine, which managed to push it along at about 40 miles an hour. This one's 1950, which is the last year they would have had girder forks because they went to telescopic in 51. The engine may have been slow, but it was apparently it was reliable and very economic, and proved very popular as a local runaround bike. This one has a nice period tooled, I assume was leather, toolbox strapped to it, which is very very stylish. The side valve, which we've just seen, gave way to this overhead valve type, fitted with telescopic forks and plunger rear end to give you a bit of suspension. A 175 version was available as well as a 125. Now this bike's fitted with mudguard embellishers front and rear, as are some of the others if you look, which is a very popular thing to do in 1950s France and into the 60s as well. There were a wide range of manufacturers knocking out these little embellishers in alloy, not just for bikes. They were very popular for cars as well. People like Robry made sets for all the popular models, particularly well known amongst 2CVers. I was going to say a very French fad, but having said that, you could also buy similar things for Volkswagens in Germany. So maybe in the 1950s people were just looking for something to bling up their bikes, jazz up their lives. Post-war depression was being pushed away and a brighter future was in sight. The third bike of this little trio is badged up as a Moto Bacane, but it's still a Moto Conforce, it's the same factory essentially. Now this one's particularly rare, as it's marked up as a Moby Super, which I think is the Z23, the C, and was a luxury model in the Ranger 175 engines. And strangely, they were fitted with lots of one-off bits to make them different from the rest of the range, which bizarrely included a different frame, which is taking things to an extreme, I think. But anyway, the Super didn't sell in great numbers particularly, so I would imagine whoever owns this bike would have a bit of a nightmare getting parts, particularly frame parts, body parts, if anything got damaged. But anyway, a very nice looking bike. I really like this one, very stylish. I think it's got a hint of sort of 1950s bullet about it. Don't know what you think, but that's what I thought. On to a couple of sidecars next. The first one being dragged about by a 1947 Zotero RGS with its 500cc overhead valve motor, which made about 21 brake horsepower or so. This particular one dated from 1947, so it must have been one of the last of the bikes with girders on again. And once again, the tyre pump is bolted to the front of the girders. Now this particular bike, if my understanding of what the owner said was correct, and my memory is correct, was an army model and was stamped A to show it was an army vehicle, so at some time this would have been in the forces. The second outfit is pulled by a Rattier, which you quite rightly probably think looks very much like a BMW, because after the Second World War, a lot of German motorcycles and a very large quantity of spare parts were left behind just outside Paris, I believe. So the French quite sensibly started assembling them into complete motorcycles. A couple of companies fell by the wayside doing this until eventually the supply ran out. But by the late 50s, Rattier decided to take up manufacturing a brand new 600cc bike, which borrowed heavily from the BMW bits that had been lying around. So the engine is very similar, and I believe the gearbox is identical. The original plan was to sell them to the police, because if you've ever seen photographs of President de Gaulle at that era, the outriders were all on BMWs. But sadly, the police decided to actually use BMWs and didn't buy the homemade Rattiers. So only about 1,000 or so were made. The company did try exporting them, including to the US. There should be a little picture here of an attempt in the US. But I can't find any figures for any overseas sales at all. Presumably they must have sold some, but very, very small in number. So before we leave the four strokes, there were a couple of slightly newer bikes there. First of all, this Yamaha XT500, which had a large petrol tank in a Dakar style, which is a competition that's a huge following in France. It's very, very popular. As is the XT500, they were very popular as well. I don't know the manufacturer of the tank, it's not one I recognise. I believe there were several. The French motorcycle market has always been very strong in bolt-on type accessories, because endurance racing was also very popular there, so fairings, seat units, petrol tanks, all that sort of stuff were available in very large numbers in France. The second slightly newer bike, and the final one in this little video, is British. It's a BSA 500 single, an MX. This one was a 1972 model, so very, very much the end of BSA production. It's a rare motorcycle full stop, never mind in rural France. And I believe now the 500 MXs are so sought after, they're making huge amounts of money. So again, an unusual thing to find in a small French car park. So anyway, there we go. That's it for this video. There will be a part 2 where we're going to look at some smaller two-strokes like I mentioned at the beginning. So please call back if you think that might be of any interest. Please subscribe. And if you like French cars, there's also a video on site. Have a look in the playlist of some French classic cars at Mont Richard taken last year. So thanks very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.